Imagine 5,000 soldiers, 1/4 of the entire United States Army, 500 scouts, thousands of Mexican militiamen, all of them scouring the jagged peaks of the Sierra Madre for one thing. Not an army, not a fort, just one man. He was 60 years old. He had no uniform, he had no supply lines. He had only a Winchester rifle, a knife, and a rage so cold it made the desert sun feel like a shadow. The settlers called him a bloodthirsty savage. The newspapers called him the human tiger. But when Mexican soldiers saw him charging through a hail of bullets, bullets that seemed to magically veer away from his skin, they didn't scream his name in anger. They screamed it in prayer. Geronimo. They were begging for mercy. They didn't get it. This is the story of Goyakla, the one who yawns. A man who never wanted to be a warrior until the world gave him no other choice. This is the rise, the fall, and the heartbreaking betrayal of the last great ghost of the American West. Before the blood, there was the yawn. Born in 1829, Goyakla was a healer. He was a family man. He lived in a world where the mountains were gods and the wind spoke in riddles. He had a wife, Alope, and 3 young children. Then came the year 1858. While Goyakla was trading in a town called Llanos, Mexican soldiers swept into his camp. They didn't just fight, they slaughtered. When Goyakla returned, he found a silence he would never forget. His mother, his wife, and his 3 children lay in the dirt. He didn't cry. Not then. He walked to the river, burned his family's tiepiece, and destroyed every toy his children had ever touched. He stood in the ashes and heard a voice in the wind. No gun can ever kill you. From that second, Goyakla died, and something else was born. A vendetta that would last 30 years. The U.S. Army had never seen anything like the Chiricahua Apache. They weren't like the Sioux or the Cheyenne who fought in great, sweeping charges. The Apache were ghosts. Geronimo's hacks for survival weren't in any West Point manual. First, water from stone. He knew which cacti held life and which held poison. Second, the silent trek. His warriors could run 70 miles a day over jagged rock in leather moccasins, disappearing into the terrain where cavalry horses broke their legs. Third, psychological terror. He didn't just kill, he left messages. He turned the vast desert into a labyrinth where the hunter was always being watched by the prey. For decades, Geronimo moved between reservations and the wild. Every time the government tried to tame him, he broke out. He hated the civilized life, the rotting flower, the stagnant water, the loss of his people's soul. Each breakout added to his legend. To the Americans, he was a criminal. To his people, he was the last flicker of a dying sun. The final showdown. General Nelson Miles was humiliated. He had 5,000 troops deployed to catch Geronimo's final band. How many did Geronimo have? 35. 35 people, including women and children, outmaneuvered the most powerful army on Earth for 5 months. They lived on horse meat and cactus. They slept on cliffs. They were exhausted, starving, and hunted like wolves. But even then, they weren't caught. They chose to come in. Geronimo surrendered because he realized his people were tired of running. He was promised he would see his family again. He was promised a return to Arizona. Every single promise was a lie. This is the part they don't teach in the movies. The great warrior spent the last 27 years of his life as a prisoner of war. The U.S. government realized Geronimo was worth more alive than dead. He became a celebrity, a circus act. They took him to the 1904 World's Fair in St. Louis. They sat him in a booth and charged tourists to see the terror of the West. He sold his buttons for 25 cents. He sold his hat. He signed autographs for nickels. He even rode in President Theodore Roosevelt's inaugural parade. He leaned in and whispered to the president, "Let me go home to the bones of my fathers." Roosevelt looked at him and said, "No, your people would start a war." The man who could outrun an army was now a caged bird in a suit, selling his own legend to the people who destroyed his world. In February 1909, an old man fell off his horse on a cold, wet road near Fort Sill, Oklahoma. He lay in the mud all night. A few days later, Geronimo died of pneumonia. His final words weren't a war cry. They were a confession to his nephew. "I should never have surrendered. I should have fought until I was the last man living." Today, his name is shouted by paratroopers as they jump into the abyss. It's a symbol of courage, of defiance, of the impossible.